Welcome to Married to History, where we try to be informative, entertaining, and family friendly.
Aloha, I'm Christopher. I have a fancy piece of paper on my wall that says that I know more about history than most people do.
I'm Shirley. I'm a homeschool mom that relies on good curriculum, Christopher, and Google to teach our kids history.
Google. I'm smarter than Google.
Hey, honey, I have a history question for you today.
I love history questions.
What kind of plays were being put on in World War II in the Pacific Theater? Were they musicals? Were they straight plays? Were they classics like Shakespeare? Were they like
Give me strength.
Cat on a Hot Tin Roof?
When we say, during wartime, when we say theater, we don't mean a big room where people go to watch musicals and plays and whatnot, and the audience claps and cheers or throws tomatoes at people.
But
We
I have seen historical fiction like MASH or whatever, where they do have theaters and they do put on plays. We just watched White Christmas. That begins with a production.
That begins with a production in the European theater, yes.
Yeah, in the European theater. Okay, so what was typically put on by these theaters?
Well, you see, the thing that I love about that is that I was trying to answer this question, but then you cut me off thinking that you were smarter than me.
Okay, continue.
So, in wartime, when we say theater, we mean the geographic area or the region in which the battles or in which the battles are taking place or in which the campaign is being waged. In World War II, we typically divide it up into two theaters: the European theater, where all the fighting was being done in Europe, and the Pacific theater, where all the fighting was being done in and around the Pacific.
But why is it called theater? Because that's dumb. Is it to highlight the fact that everything is fake? Like wrestling? It's just all fake. It's all scripted.
Okay, well, first off, while yes, the storylines and whatnot in wrestling might be scripted, if you were to tell a wrestler and challenge them to their face and say that all of it's fake, they're going to hopefully politely remind you that you can't fake a body slam. You can't fake falling off of something. You
Okay.
can't fake jumping and landing.
But they do. Okay, no. Listen.
No. These guys are trained professionals and experts. They know how to do this stuff, minimizing injury to themselves and their opponents.
Yes.
But you still cannot fake when you see someone fall or when you see someone get tossed on the ground. You can't fake that. They are really falling. They are really being tossed on the ground in as safe a way as possible. Yes, but it's not fake. People have died. People have gotten serious injuries in wrestling. You can't fake that.
Okay. But still, like, they learn how to fall correctly, and they stomp their foot to make it sound louder.
Yes.
So wrestling is as fake as reality TV. Reality TV is real, but they do re-record scenes. They do orchestrate dramatic situations for the camera. They do tell the people, hey, you should go shopping at this store because we're going to have a situation set up where they wouldn't normally have just gone to that store that day because that's random. You know what I mean?
Well, I can't speak to all of that, but I can guarantee you they don't retake the fights.
Well, not that, but it was just an example. Like, sure, it's real, but it has an element of scripted.
Yes, and I don't deny that, and I don't think anybody with sense would deny that yes, there is an element of script, that there are writers that control these things. But it doesn't change the fact that these guys are really putting life and limb out there.
Okay.
Not necessarily life all the time, but it has happened.
So theater is typically 100% scripted. So, are you revealing a conspiracy theory about war?
I am not revealing a conspiracy theory of war at all. So to again go back to the very first question before you went off on this little tangent of yours, I do not know why they call it the theater versus any other term by which they can call it. I just know that, at least today, we tend to use theater for these scenarios. So I know that going back to World War II, there was the Pacific Theater and there was the European Theater. And actually, I believe Africa got its own theater. I believe we refer to it as the North African Theater also. I might be wrong there. And perhaps the fighting in China and India, or China, India, Burma, the Southeast Asia area, perhaps that also had its own theater but I don't recall ever hearing a name for that one.
Okay.
Definitely Pacific Theater, definitely European Theater, perhaps North African Theater, but I'm not sure if there were any other theaters that were identified. In World War One, okay, so in World War One, to the best of my knowledge, we didn't
Hmm.
call them theaters; they were called fronts. There was the
Oh,
Western Front
yeah.
and the Eastern Front,
I've heard
and
that.
then the fighting that was going on in the other parts of the world, in the African colonies, in the Middle East. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if those were given front names or theater names or any other name to that matter. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
aware of any of those.
That's
Um,
so weird then. Why did we
See, I
start
don't know about the
using that?
Spanish American War, as there were definitely two different theaters there. There was the fighting in and around Cuba, and then there was the fighting out in the Pacific colonies.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know if we call them theaters or whatnot there. Okay, in the Civil War, we typically talk about it as the Eastern and the Western Theater. The Eastern Theater gets all the credit because that's where Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia were fighting.
Yeah.
But out in the Western Theater, which was basically west of the Mississippi, or maybe even as far west as no, because I think we tend to include Tennessee. I think we tend to include anything that wasn't in Virginia, pretty much as a part of the Western Theater. And so while Robert E. Lee, yes, was having a lot of success in the Eastern Theater,
Yeah.
in the Western Theater of the Civil War, no, it was really no contest. The Confederacy was consistently getting its butt kicked all throughout the war.
Huh.
It's one of their main reasons for why, as much success and praise as the Army of Northern Virginia gets
Mm-hmm.
during the American Civil War, it probably wasn't realistic that Lee's army alone would have been able to win the war for the South because
Okay.
they were losing too much everywhere else. So anyway, getting out of that, going further back.
Yeah, let's not go on a Civil War tangent.
Sorry, and I'm not aware of any different names in the Mexican theater. I think they might have just been called the campaigns.
Hmm.
Though even then, I don't think they were given campaign names. I think they were just referred to as things. There was the Great Long Walk with General Scott, and I don't remember what the northern part of that one was. And then outside of that, I can't. Yeah, I those are the only ones I can think of off the top of my head that have used theater or something to that nature. But yes, that to answer your question rather, that
Mm-hmm.
is what it means. It is not referring to people going and seeing shows. Not to say that there weren't shows going on in
Yeah.
these places,
Yeah. Bob
but when we
Hope and all
say
that.
theater in terms of warfare, yes, we mean the general area in which the military operations are taking place.
Okay. For real though, that confused me when I was a kid because I am not a history person, obviously.
No,
Um,
really?
but I got good grades in school. I always got good grades, but ask me to explain it to somebody else after the test, not gonna happen.
Oh, we've talked about that before. It's
Yeah.
about much of the educational system today is based on getting kids to memorize something
Names and dates and
yeah, memorize names and dates, memorize sentences without actually having any understanding of
yeah.
why these names and dates are important.
Right.
They'll win you a lot of money in Jeopardy, but they aren't going to help you make informed decisions as adults about about the similar situations that are going on.
Right. And I think it's also just my personality. Like I was really good at like cramming and doing flashcards and memorizing, but
Hmm.
there's only so much space in my brain to hold all that memorized info.
Hmm.
And so if the focus was on memorizing details, some of it's going to drop out once it's not needed anymore. And I never learned how to use those details to, apply to other things. But anyways, my point was I don't remember what year I would have learned about World War II, but I just
At the
remember
latest, it should have been junior year of high school.
at the
Because
latest
okay, back in my day in high school and sophomore year, you took world history. Sophomore or freshman year, you took world
freshman for
history,
me.
and then you would have learned about World War II. But they would have only usually in the world history class they only
Uh-huh.
cover the European part of it, and they don't cover the Pacific
Oh.
theater until junior year when you took U.S. history. Yeah, they broke
Oh.
them up.
Yeah, anyways. Okay, so all that to say, I was just going to say, it confused me because like talking about like the Western Front, that makes sense. Like the front of the army, like that's where the line is, where the forwardmost units are. That makes sense to me. But theater? No, I never thought that like literally we're talking about the theater. But it was such a confusing term. I'm like, I don't know what the Pacific Theater is. I don't know what that means. Like, I get it, but still, it's a confusing word and it's unnecessary.
Well, I could be wrong, but I would imagine that its use probably has something to do with as the size of wars expanded and the depth of what's involved in wars expanded, that theater became a new term because it was recognized that, okay, there's not just a front anymore. There's not just battle lines anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There are huge regions in which conflict is taking place now. So, like the Pacific Theater, for example,
Uh-huh.
there really wasn't a front, I think you could say. There was no spot where, the two lines were dug in and they were fighting back and forth across
Because we're
this
not
line
doing
trying to expand it.
trenches.
There were fights going on at islands over here, islands over there, parts of the, on the
Mm-hmm.
mainland near India, in Burma, and Indonesia. There was fighting
Mm-hmm.
going on in China as well. There were also attacks on Japan at the same time, air attacks, not land attacks. And then there
Right.
was the slow creeping up of the island hopping campaign. And then there were the battles out in the ocean as well. So there were fights going all throughout this huge area. There was no
Mm-hmm.
front line. There was no trench like they had in World War One. There was
Yeah.
no 30th parallel like in Korea where they could say, this is where the action is going on. No, action was
Mm-hmm.
going on in such a broad area. Same thing applies to the European theater. There was the
Mm-hmm.
Eastern Front where the Russians were fighting. There was the air war where Britain was holding off against Luftwaffe attacks. Eventually, the
Mm-hmm.
North African campaign turns into the Italian campaign. And then after that, D-Day. So now you also have the French campaign. So there were 3 different fronts in the European theater alone.
Okay, that makes sense. That helps. Okay, I didn't think about that. Like, you don't have like a clear trench line anymore.
And I dare say that this is probably, if there ever is another global war, it's probably going to be
Mm-hmm.
the same thing. There's probably not going to be a front line. There's going to be
Mm-hmm.
fighting all over the place. And
Yeah.
for all the I love me some good sci-fi, and I
Mm-hmm.
love Star Wars, I love Star Trek, and there have been plenty of wars in Star Wars and Star Trek and some of the other franchises, and I've noticed that almost all of those, they still tend to write the warfares and whatnot as though it's a front line scenario.
Yeah.
That's not realistic, though. I mean, the number of ships you would need to
Mm-hmm.
completely isolate a planet to create a front line scenario, that's not realistic. I mean, there are going to be ships flying in and out all around the planet and whatnot, all
Right.
that. And that's just assuming it's limited to one planet, to say nothing of you're trying to take a star system.
It's so much easier to understand it that way, though.
Oh, I get it. And when I play with my Legos, I usually only have a frontline situation going on. I'm not campaigning throughout an entire theater with my Legos.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're talking World War II, you said we have the Pacific Theater,
Yes.
the European Theater.
Yes.
You said African.
hmm
It was called the African Theater.
I don't know off the top of my head. I would guess it would have been called either the African Theater, the North African Theater, or perhaps even the North African Theater of Operations.
Okay. And was there anything else? Was it those 3?
So the Pacific and the European one are the only ones that I know of for sure.
Okay.
The North African one is a maybe, or it might have just been included in the European theater,
Uh-huh.
and then possibly the fighting that was going on in Burma, along the Indian, or along or near the Indian border in
Yeah.
Burma, in Southeast Asia. That might have also had and in China might have also had its own name, but I'm
Okay.
not aware of one if it did.
But Pacific Theater definitely encompassed Hawaii. So that was
Without
the
a doubt,
US's
yeah, the
involvement.
Pacific Theater would have been everything from
Japan.
everything inside the Pacific Ocean. So that would have been Hawaii, that would have been the
Mhm.
Japanese main islands, that would have been all the islands in between them. So the island
Mhm.
hopping campaign and all the battles that were fought out like Midway, Coral
Mhm.
Sea, Leyte Gulf, all those battles as well.
Okay. I mean, that doesn't mean anything because I don't have a map in front of me. I've never heard of most of those islands.
Coral Sea, Midway, and Leyte Gulf were not islands. They were bought in the regions of water near land in most
Wait,
cases.
we're just counting water?
No, I'm saying that those were okay. Those were 3 battles, arguably
Okay.
the 3 most famous battles that took place in the Pacific Theater of
Uh-huh.
Operations. But they
In
were
the
all
ocean?
also naval battles, exclusively naval battles.
Oh,
I
that
shouldn't
makes
say
sense.
exclusively. There were some land troops in the area or involved
Mhm.
in Midway at least, but for the most part, no. The fighting that was happening was between ships and airplanes.
Okay, just ignore me because I realized how stupid that sounded.
I still love you.
Because you can have a war even if you don't have land.
Yes. And
Never mind.
most of the fighting in the Pacific Theater, or at least a fair amount of the fighting in the Pacific Theater, was not involving ground troops.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the plans when the war began and after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the Navy proposed a plan that said, forget this idea of island hopping. We don't need to. We can just drive straight towards the home islands and bombard them for there.
Yeah.
It'll be faster. We won't lose as many ground troops taking unnecessary islands. Let's do this. And it probably would have worked too, but MacArthur had more what's the word? MacArthur had more charisma, more charm, and he sweet talked to FDR into his plan of no. Let's take this more southerly route where we're going to go up all these islands instead.
But why?
So there's a good deal of speculation for that. One of the leading theories, and I suspect this is true, is because the Navy's plan completely ignored the Philippines, which was an American colony, but the Japanese had taken it over. The Americans were forced to abandon it. That was MacArthur's home base, and MacArthur had spent a good chunk of his life there. His dad was the military governor of the Philippines for a long time, and then MacArthur himself, his last assignment before the war broke out, he was in charge of the Philippine Islands. So he definitely had a lot of love, a lot of familiarity with that area.
Was he just trying to vacation along the way?
No, he was
see the sights.
No, I think it was that
this island had cool corn dogs.
Oh my goodness! Would you let me answer the question? No, I think he legitimately wanted to honor a promise that he made that he was going to return. He wanted to go back. He wanted to liberate those islands.
Oh, okay.
So I think that was a big chunk of why he wanted to do the plan he did. But I think most people would agree today that even though the campaign did work, I mean, it wasn't a failure, and MacArthur was very, very good at it. This is one of the things that I really love about studying him and talking about him.
Yeah.
He was a very good general in that there were things about his enemy that he understood better than anybody else, about their culture, so that he knew, if I do this, then they're sure. Think about it like this. If you're playing a game of chess, you make a move, there are thousands of moves that your opponent might make in response to that.
Right.
But MacArthur was very good at, because of understanding their culture, because of studying his opponents, knowing, if I do this, I know exactly which move they're going to make in response to this. And his plans, he was constantly being belittled or criticized by other generals, even ones in his own staff. And over and over again, with very few exceptions, it turned out that he was exactly right on the ball with the decisions that he made. So...
Okay, but
going back to it though, despite all that I just said, I think that most historians would agree with me that the Navy's plan would have worked exactly as the Navy said it would. We would have still won the war, maybe a little bit earlier, and definitely with less American lives being lost because there would have been fewer ground invasions.
So you just got done talking about how awesome MacArthur was, but he screwed up.
No, he didn't screw up. His plan wasn't the best plan.
Okay, that makes me wonder though. MacArthur versus you, would he still predict you well?
I would imagine so.
Okay, I'm just
imagining that he's smarter than me, and I know that at the very minimum, he has a bit more experience than I do commanding tanks and airplanes and whole divisions of military resources. I think at best I've had experience commanding 5 guys on my Halo team.
Okay, I mean, obviously, in a real war situation, but I'm just wondering, how well would he be able to predict you? Because I'm just reminded of that one day that your best friend brought over this book all about strategies for playing paper, rock, scissors that he had studied and like...
Oh, yes, I remember this. I do hope he's listening to this episode because I'm sure he's going to want to kill you.
You'll have to send it to him. But I was talking about this to the boys the other day because they had found out, like, if someone does a paper, they're always going to do paper afterwards or something like that. Like, they had heard one of these strategies, so I was telling the boys, yeah, your friend tried to use those on you. He couldn't predict what you were going to do in paper, rock, scissors. He had a whole book. He knows you better than anyone except me, but he could not predict you. And that's one key thing about you that drives your friend crazy, is that you are predictable in your unpredictableness.
And I love that of the many things in life that he appears to be better than me at, that this is one that I have that I'm not even putting any effort into.
Right, you're not trying to go against it. I can't say that I ever
theorize or strategize or anything. At best, my strategy when I'm playing a game of rock, paper, scissors is in like the half a millisecond before I reveal what I'm going to have, I make a decision.
It was great. He was just so frustrated and baffled and like, Christopher. So I want to know, like, you versus MacArthur.
I wouldn't mind sitting down and playing board games with a man, but I hope the time never comes that a cloned or resurrected MacArthur is going to lead armies and I'm going to find myself the leader of the opposition to his forces. That said, I've learned a little bit about the man. I know some of the mistakes he made. So, particularly towards the end of his career, he got I think his main problem was he was a bit overconfident and he was paranoid about other people trying to stab him in the back, kind of thing.
I think we talked about him before.
We probably did. Like, I think one of the keys to his downfall, or the keys to his opponents having enough sway to start kind of pushing him out, was he did not see the Chinese interference in the Korean conflict happen. It didn't occur to him. If I remember correctly, he was warned about it several times. Like, oh, hey, the Chinese aren't going to be happy about American soldiers being on their border. They're going to come and do something.
Right.
And MacArthur kind of brushed it off every time, said, let them come. We'll wipe them out. Or, no, they're not brave enough to come.
Right.
Supposedly, he even himself went out on a scouting mission once, surveying the passages that an army would have needed to use in order to be able to cross over to fight in Korea. He himself went on a plane scouting those areas and saw, there's no signs that they're doing anything, so let's move on, without taking into account, as he normally would, based on what we know about his knowledge and his study of land and all things that go into campaigns. He should have known that, dude, it snowed recently. Yeah. Any signs would have been covered up by the time you were out there scouting.
That seems obvious. Wow. Okay, so MacArthur was a general.
Yes. So actually, he went beyond. He was one of the last field marshals, or the equivalent of a field marshal that the American military had. All right. So generals are top of the army. Admirals are top of the navy. A marshal outranks them both. It's an old term that doesn't get used anymore. And to be fair, I don't even think that MacArthur was called that, but his ranking was pretty much that, marshal.
Okay. The highest general you could be.
He was a 5-star, so he had supreme command of all military forces that were in the area. I believe that includes the Navy, even if the Navy wasn't too keen on the idea.
Okay, so but he was over the Pacific Theater? Was he the dude directing troops in all of the Pacific Theater?
So
because we say that like the president is commander in chief of the army, but like the president doesn't literally sit in the White House and say where to send this boat and that plane and that group of troops.
That is correct. The president of the United States usually does not do that. The president, to the best of my knowledge, usually is the type of person that does this. He'll say, I want you to take that city, or I want you to take that hill, take that objective. I want you to do that. I have this goal, and it'll be a broad goal, and tell the generals or tell the military, all right, go get it done for me.
Figure it out. Yeah.
When the president does that, or when the president says, hey, I want this to get done, he'll refer to his chiefs of staff or to his military advisors. They'll tell him, I think we should do this. I think we should do that. They'll work together to come up with plans and present him with those plans. And he may authorize, all right, this plan. I want you to do this plan. In World War II, that is what happened. So I mentioned that the Navy presented their plan for how they could win the war to FDR. MacArthur also presented his plan to win the war. MacArthur did get the green light, but at either before this time or at various points throughout the World War II, both the Army and the Navy came to FDR with different plans, and he was really indecisive every time and kind of just told both of them, all right, both of you, go ahead, do your own thing.
That's how I deal with the kids when they're fighting. I'm like, I don't know. You guys just figure it out.
So one of the things that makes MacArthur, going back to him, a bit of a tricky situation is that, like I said, he was already kind of falling out of favor because he was not the best guy politically speaking, and like it or not, the United States, even the United States military, is a political entity. If you want to get up into the highest ranks, you need political clout, not just battlefield awesomeness.
Right. You have to have good PR.
So MacArthur was lucky in that even though in the American military, politics was still a very big thing, in the rest of the world, which was terrified of Japan and of the Nazis and others, they all said that, no, we want MacArthur leading this fight.
Really?
We don't care about you American politics in your military. We want the guy that we know can fight.
Oh.
So a lot of the allies, it was a condition of theirs if they were going to be supporting war in the Pacific. It's like, no, we want MacArthur to be in command. We will let you guys have command over all our troops, all our military assets, as long as you can promise us MacArthur's going to be the guy.
Dang.
And after the war was over, so I believe throughout the war, don't know how much control MacArthur actually had over the Navy, because I do know that the Navy did have some of its own operations.
Mm-hmm.
But at least after the war was over and they were deciding, all right, what are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
MacArthur was made what we call SCAP, Supreme Commander of the Allied Powers.
Okay.
He was the top man for everything, no matter
Oh,
what
for
country.
all of the countries.
No matter what country, no matter what branch of the service it was, he was in supreme command of all of those forces that were in Japan and in that area, which
Pacific
included Korea when the Korean conflict got started. Yep, so the highest rank he had was the SCAP, the Supreme Commander of the Allied Powers, and so basically that is the Field Marshal. He was the Supreme Commander.
Yeah.
It is arguable that no military man in history has ever had as much power at his fingertips as MacArthur did. And one of the things
Did he go mad with it?
One of the things that still made that rather awkward in some situations was that, all right, so as far as the world is concerned, MacArthur is the most powerful military man on earth.
Yeah.
But as an American soldier, he is still under the authority of the President of the United States.
Oh, yeah.
So if FDR or Truman, who was president by the time he became SCAP, told him to do something, he still had to do what Truman told him to do.
And the other Allied powers were okay with that. They were aware that that's how the power ladder went.
I honestly don't know how much the other allies knew or cared about that matter. Because it's definitely clear to MacArthur that he was of the impression that, no, I'm going to do whatever I want. And he wasn't like an evil dictator kind of guy.
Thank goodness.
He was very well studied. I'm not saying that everything he did was perfect, but like I said, he was very well studied. He knew the culture of the people. He knew what worked for them. He knew how to, and I think he very successfully transitioned the Japanese from the government system that they had using their own cultural norms. So like he didn't break anything terribly bad in their own culture to get them to transfer into more of the Western mindset instead of their ancient mindset, or I shouldn't say they're ancient, they're culturally,
they're traditional.
Yeah, they're traditional. There we go. Their traditional mindset.
Wow.
And I think it works spectacularly because Japan is an awesome country today.
Well, yeah. What about the European theater? Who was in charge over there?
So the European theater, that was a bit more of a sticky situation because there you had the British and the French and the Russians and the Americans all vying for the control over what was going to go on in Europe. So MacArthur had undisputed control in Japan, and I think that's why Japanese Reconstruction went a heck of a lot better. To be fair, Japanese culture, again, has a lot to do with that too, and this was, again, one of the things where MacArthur excelled. Japanese culture was very much a military culture. They revered military heroes back then.
So he was respected.
Here's MacArthur, who has proven himself to be a military master, and he utilized that very well to, again, not be a cruel dictator, but to get the Japanese people to recognize that, oh, hey, that you respect me, use that respect to get them to make the adjustments they need to transition into a Western mindset. So yeah, it worked very well in Japan, but yeah, in Europe, you had politics, for lack of a better word, going on between most particularly the communists or the USSR and the other allies. Not to say that the French and the British and the Americans always got along.
Well, no, because they didn't. We know they didn't. But it just seems like the European theater would have been more messy. And I'm right in that assessment.
Very messy. And part of the reason for that, again, not just because of the politics, is probably also going to be because of culture again. Japan, one culture, one unified people for the most part. A couple different variations because, yes, there are Chinese people involved, Koreans involved, and other things. But for the most part, these are ancient cultures, ancient lands. There's not a lot of diversity to deal with. And there's not a lot of, there's not too much in the spirits of new nationalism. Don't get me wrong. They still had to they still had to deal with, there were communists in China and Japan that were trying to establish communist governments and influences during the time. But it wasn't as severe of a problem as it was in Europe, where there were a heck of a lot more people with a heck of a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? With a heck of a lot more angst or anger or distrust, mistrust with their neighbors.
Right. And that's like all of Europe. Constantly fighting each other and distrusting their neighbors.
And again, not to mention that because there was not any one commander with one policy for how we're going to put Europe back together, but it was all the squabbling. They were, of course, the various sides all over, and even the guys stuck in the middle were going to use power and influence from one side to the other to try to get their way.
Well, yeah.
Again, throughout a lot of the reconstruction efforts, like as the UN starts to grow and become more involved, continually a lot of UN countries and European countries specifically, are saying over and over again that, okay, yeah, Russia's the threat. Russia is the growing threat to everything. And Russia repeatedly keeps saying, no, Germany is still a threat. They kind of
Don't
go,
look at
well,
us.
hey, we kind of like took care of that. Germany's not a threat anymore, really. You recognize that, right? But no, and I think this is legitimate. I don't think this was the Soviet Union trying to pander. I think they legitimately, to their minds, thought that, no, Germany is still the enemy. I mean, yeah, we defeated them once and they came right back. We can't do that again. We can't risk that again.
Well, what were we supposed to do? Just like firebomb the entire land?
Just keep a boot to heel on them more.
Yeah, well,
or not boot to heel, boot on the neck of them more.
Yeah, well, and USSR is the fan of doing that, aren't they?
They're not around anymore, so yes, I, at least in my American education and what studies I've done outside of Western sources, I think it is fair to say that yes, the USSR was very efficient in how it could put down dissent.
Yep. Okay, so I have one final, very serious question before we end this episode.
I don't believe you.
It's very serious.
I don't believe you at all. And I think if any of our listeners believe you as well, then they have not been listening that loyally to us.
You're not MacArthur. You can't predict me.
Can't I?
Okay, here's the question. So, you know those quizzes, like, if you were a sandwich, what type of sandwich would you be? Okay.
I can't say I'm overly familiar with that one, but you and the kids love
doing
the
idea.
those. Which Harry Potter house would I fall into?
Yeah. Or like which Harry Potter character do you most identify with?
Okay. So yes, I'm familiar with the concept of these types of tests.
So if World War II was Broadway, the Pacific Theater would be which musical? And the European Theater would be which musical? Your silence is great. It's very helpful. You're a creative man. You can think of this.
I'm not overly familiar with a wide variety of musicals. I'm searching my brain to think, surely there is a better musical in my head than Miss Saigon or The King and I.
No, see, that's too obvious. You can't go there. You got to go with, like, feeling, like, not literal details of the musical. See, I love asking you this question because I don't know. So I couldn't answer this.
So I'm gonna say that the Eastern Theater would be the Music Man.
Why? Why?
Because a con man rolled into town convincing all these kids and their parents that, hey, we can do these great mighty things.
Yes.
And then despite the fact that it ended up causing an awful lot of trouble, in the end, all the parents and whatnot were happy and proud.
I love this so much. You answered perfectly. I'm so happy. Okay, I can't wait.
I answered perfectly.
No, that was a great answer.
Okay.
See, I love when creative people can think of things like this because can I tell you why I'm a BLT? No, I have no idea, but you are capable of BSing and making it sound cool. So I love this.
Yeah, but it occurs to me in my analogy that proposes that in the musical The Music Man, that troublemaker is still alive and well, and everybody's forgiven him, apparently.
It doesn't have to be perfect.
Okay.
It just has to sound good.
For Japan,
no, the Pacific Theater in general.
The Pacific Theater.
So all that area.
I'm gonna go with Phantom of the Opera.
Ooh.
There was an underdog who everybody thought was it's not really worth messing with because we don't need to take them seriously. All of a sudden, dang, we need to take them seriously. And even though they fought the good, terrifying fight, because kamikazes were terrible, we still beat them in the end.
I love it.
And so a whole bunch of people got hurt and killed because we underestimated these dudes on a power trip or on an ego trip.
So you're saying that America should have kept its hand at the level of its eyes, and then Pearl Harbor might not have happened.
Huh?
That's a Phantom reference. It's fine.
I think the last time I saw Phantom of the Opera were like whenever you brought that DVD home for the latest version.
I love that movie.
I am not overly fond of Phantom of the Opera.
You did fabulously. That was perfect. I loved it so much.
I'll take your word for it.
It was beautiful. Beautiful.
Why do I put up with you?
I don't know.
So, given what I've told you about about MacArthur, what
Uh-huh.
musical what would he star in? What would
What?
be the
Oh,
musical of his life?
what would MacArthur star in? Oh crap! We'll be here for a long time. I'm gonna edit out a
Weren't you
lot of
just
stuff.
giving me a guff for like thinking about it for like a minute or two,
No,
and now
but
you're saying you're going to be here for a
no.
long
This is what
time?
I said. You're a creative person, and you're really good at BSing. BS meaning bologna sandwich for our
Hmm.
young listeners. Um,
How much you want to bet our younger listeners know full well what BS means, and it's common enough in their language?
well, our own children don't believe me when I say BS stands for bologna sandwich, but I try. Anyways, you're really good at that, and I am not at all. So I don't know. The musical of MacArthur's life. Um,
You can't say how to succeed in business without really trying because he really tried.
I'm not familiar with that one.
That's a funny one.
Let's see.
Guy
What
finds a
would he
book with
star
instructions
in?
on how to succeed in business without really trying and follows it to go from starting as I think he starts as a temp to becoming vice president of the company. I don't remember exactly how it ended, but yeah, it was funny.
I know. Dear Evan Hansen. Because
I'm going to need a good explanation on this.
I may edit this out because I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going to start like Michael Scott. Okay. Because he got to this point where everyone loved him, right? Like Evan Hansen. Like he was on top of the world. He had all his friends. He had a girlfriend. Like all these admirers. He was famous. But then like he screwed up at the end of the play, and people hated him.
Is that really what happens at the end?
Well, yeah, he like has a major fall because people realize that he's been lying the whole time.
Oh, I've never seen it, so I just assumed that he recovered in the end, and people like a Music Man that he
No,
still
he
recovered in the end, and everybody liked him, and it was all happy.
no, people didn't like him in the end, but it's not really addressed. He just kind of goes into obscurity.
Huh.
And he moves forward with his life,
Okay.
but he loses everything that he had gained.
Cool.
That's too dramatic. MacArthur didn't do that.
He
didn't fall
did
from
lose.
grace that much, did he?
I wouldn't say he fell from grace.
And it wasn't based on a lie.
No. So I would.
Okay, bad
If I were to
example.
describe his fall, I would say that in the minds of the people, the average people like you and me, he was still a god and a hero. But for all the people in power, party leaders because he wanted to run for president a couple of times, so party leaders, people in Congress, people in Washington, people in the White House, people in the army, they had the people with say and power to actually do anything with him. He had fallen out of their favor.
Okay, so that's not Evan Hansen. Let's see. I don't know. I'm not good at this.
Pretty sad, seeing as how you regularly say that you use musicals to teach our children, and yet
No,
you
I
can't
teach
think
them
of a
literal
musical
details from the musical.
Well, we can't all be as perfect and as awesome as me.
I know.
So what you're admitting
I
is
bow
that
down.
I married down.
Yes, that's literally what I'm saying. All right, thank you
Admitted
for
it.
listening.
I've won. This is a monumental moment for men across the nation. You can win. You can get your wives to admit that they were the ones that done screwed up. Hey, Ron.
Only if you don't understand sarcasm.
Why you gotta be like that? Why you gotta ruin it?
Because
There was a moment. There was a bright, shining moment for all mankind. Oh, that's why you did it. Because that's what women gotta do.
that's what we gotta
crush
do.
that light.
We gotta do.
And you crushed that light so
Yep.
well. I should probably be clear. I, of course, do not mean any of these negative things that I have said about women. I love my wife.
Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, then please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a 5-star review.
If you'd like to hear a future episode with more information about today's topic, contact us on Gmail, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok at Married to History Pod.
Also, please contact us if you have a silly question idea or if there's something from history that you would love to learn about.
Just be sure to specify in your message if it's a silly or serious, because we don't want to treat a genuine quest for knowledge like a joke.
Talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye. Before we get into today's episode, let's explore something that I can't read. Let me try that again.
Oh, we don't even need to do that.
Oh, well, never mind. We don't need to do that, apparently. Because I got everything right last time. I need no time for corrections.
We're just not fact-checking ourselves after the fact. we
I
haven't been doing that.
I am the facts to be checked. No, that's not the right way to say it. I am the fact checker because I have the fancy piece of paper on the wall which says that if I say it's fact, it's fact.
That's not how fact works.
That sounds totally like how facts work in every method of study. Somebody with a fancy enough piece of paper on the wall says it's so, well then it's so.
No.
And even if you have evidence that that is not so, well how dare you criticize that fancy piece of paper?
No.
You know what that's called? It's called the argument of authority, or the appeal to authority, rather.
Yes.
The idea that, because his piece of paper is fancier, that we must submit to that person.
Uh-huh.
But I'm not bitter about that at all.
Not bitter at all.
People with fancier pieces of paper on the wall than me are idiots. Sorry, fools. Fools. I didn't say that. I said fools.